Hello and welcome to the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. My name is Brad Tadke, my friend, and it is my honor to have you here with us today to talk gardening in Minnesota. And so we have just an absolute joy of an episode for you today. We have a longtime bird aficionado from Duluth here to talk with us about bird watching and bird feeding in your backyard and what you can and should do. So it is just an absolute, like I said, an absolute joy of an episode to talk with Laura Erickson. She has the longest running radio show about birding in the nation, and we have her here for you on the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. So the things that we talk about with Laura, you can find in the show notes for this episode at minnesotagardening.com/8. That's the number 8, minnesotagardening.com/8. Now, enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it with Laura Erickson talking about bird watching. All right, so today I am honored to have Laura Erickson here with us to talk about birds and birds in our backyard and feeding birds and what we should be doing during the winter and not feeding birds on some occasions as well. And so she is an avid birder from Duluth here in Minnesota, and she's editor of the Bird Watching magazine and host of the longest running radio program about birds in the nation, I believe. Is that right, Laura?
Yes, it is.
So thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here with us today. And you have done a lot. It's your history in the bird watching scene of things is just really, really great. And your show has been going for quite some time here. Why do you think people specifically in Minnesota care so much about watching birds? What's the intrigue there?
Birds are the most accessible wildlife as a class. When we think about mammals, the ones we find in our backyards include deer and squirrels and rabbits, occasionally skunks, occasionally all kinds of wonderful but tiny little things, flying squirrels. But at most, we're only going to get a dozen species of mammals we can recognize in our yards, where my backyard list here in Duluth has about 150 or I think even 180 species in a regular backyard. And I hear them through the window, some of which have beautiful songs where I only hear the squirrels if they're yelling at each other. I never hear my rabbits, and hardly ever hear deer do anything except occasionally make this snort. So birds, they strike our senses. They're so colorful, and so their bodies are close but no cigar to us. We're all warm-blooded vertebrates, but they have wings instead of arms. Many of them have their eyes more on the side of their face than in front. The one bird that has a face most like us is the owl. But they're just so many kinds of them, and they appeal to all our senses.
It is such a beautiful thing. And so I love watching birds and so happy to have you here to talk about this. And first off, I would like to ask a question around just birding in general. And as we talk about backyard birds specifically, what should people be doing to be attracting birds to their backyards?
The number one thing everybody should be doing is planting as many native species of plants. And I'm talking trees, I'm talking shrubs, and I'm talking herbaceous plants as possible. And trying to get rid of the most invasive exotic plants, the buckthorn, things like that cause more problems than are beneficial. It's a little bit exaggerated that buckthorn is bad for birds, but it crowds out so many native small trees and berry providing trees that provide more than just berries. The native plants also are providing this whole cornucopia of insects that are native and depend on the native plants. And those insects, my chickadees come to my feeders for suet and for seed. But boy, they when they had babies in my yard this summer, they fed them only insects from my native plants.
Fascinating. So, with that, you're saying that the native plants provide more than just the seeds and just what is growing on the plant, but it mixes with the entire ecosystem so that our birds have more to eat. Is that what I'm understanding?
Exactly. One of the most important plants you can have for birds is an oak tree. And a lot of people who are my generation, which is older, I'm going to be 70 in 2 weeks. A lot of us think, well, why plant an oak tree? It's not going to have acorns for decades. But from the time the first spring after you plant an oak tree, it's already providing the kinds of tiny caterpillars that the warblers, scarlet tanagers, and other spring migrants, those insects are what fuel their flight and then help them feed their babies. Baby birds of every species need a high protein diet, and that means insects, even seed eaters. Hardly any birds are vegans. Most of them get a lot of their protein from insects. Hummingbirds pig out on aphids and other tiny insects as well as nectar. They can't live by carbs alone.
Wow, I had no idea that hummingbirds didn't just eat nectar. That is a new one to me, so that is good. And with that as well, like oak trees, they bring in lots of pollinators and lots of beneficial wasps and all that kind of thing for keeping nasty predator insects down as well as feeding the birds. So that's great.
If it attracts pollinators, it's going to be also helpful for other insects. And there aren't too many birds that eat bees and wasps because they sting. But some birds actually have become masters at that. Those are not our backyard birds, though. You won't get too many eastern kingbirds eating your honeybees.
I have not heard of that one, so I don't have that one in my yard that I'm aware of. As we look at backyard birds, Laura, what kinds of birds should, especially if I have two girls, what types of birds should and how should we be attracting birds to instill that love of bird watching and nature into our kids? What kinds of things can we plant and actions can we take to help do that?
Well, I'm thinking about my daughter whose second word was boojay because I had blue jays that would fly to my front porch and take peanuts out of my hand. And Katie would crawl up to the living room window, pull herself up when I said, Katie, do you want to see the blue jays? And she'd go, Blue Jay? And when and they're so conspicuous and beautiful that she was utterly delighted. And now I'm a grandma, and my grandson, who's 14 months old, one of his first words, he's been saying chickadee because we have chickadees coming right to their window feeder at his house. And when he was born, because of the pandemic, my daughter and son in law were living with us first. And he could see chickadees out the window from the time he was a newborn. I'd show them the chickadees at our window feeder. Children love animals, and birds are so fascinating. And it's been fascinating for me as a grandmother to watch this little tiny toddler grandson of mine because when the chickadees fly into the feeder, they don't sit there and eat. They grab a seed and fly off, and then the next chickadee comes and he just waves hi and bye to them all the time. And he follows their little tiny bodies as they fly further away from the house into the trees. And he just finds that fascinating. Children love those kinds of things. Having a close window feeder and birds that come to actual feeders stuck on the window, either on the frame like a tray feeder or the feeders that are held up with suction cups, those give kids such an intimate view of birds that they're delighted. So bird feeders are very useful for bringing some of those birds right up close and personal for children, but we have more of them for the kids to notice in the first place when we have a lot of native plants that are attractive to birds, that provide them with shelter and provide them with food and supply them with nesting materials.
There's been some controversy, and I'm not sure where you fall on this, but there's been discussion at least about the ethics of feeding birds instead of feeding birds to come to a bird feeder instead of having birds just use all the native plants and find things on their own and that kind of thing. What do you think people need to be thinking about as they are feeding birds in their backyard?
It's very important to only feed nutritious food and to not allow it to get moldy or just stay wet for more than a few hours after a rain. We shouldn't have so much seed out there that if it starts germinating, you start seeing sunflower seeds sprouting in your tray feeder, you're letting that seed get moldy, and that's not healthy for birds. The important things with ethics are to make sure that the feeding is providing at least as much of a benefit for birds as it is for our personal entertainment. That means you never attract birds if you or your neighbors have cats outdoors, because the cats kill birds. It's important to not put feeders or berry trees near a window, except the feeders that are actually on the window. Because when birds, like I live in Duluth, right under Hawk Ridge, which is the biggest migratory raptor corridor in the inland United States. So I get a lot of hawks flying over my yard. When they scare the birds, uh, if our feeders were closer to the windows, when they scare the birds are flying at top speed, going helter skelter, and the ones that flew toward the windows would get killed. So all my feeders are too far away from the windows or smack dab on the windows. If they're on the windows, some of the birds will actually start noticing and even playing with the glass, and that teaches them not to fly into it at that window. But also, if they do take off and are going toward the glass, but they're only 3 inches away on the feeder, they're nowhere near top velocity, so they don't get hurt.
Do you recommend feeding birds all year round? Are you recommending just in the winter, or what are your thoughts on when we should be feeding birds with a bird feeder?
It takes some understanding of birds and their life cycles to really appreciate what's going on with them. In the summertime, I continue to feed. I don't feed natural suet at all in the summer. Sometimes I keep some out. I don't like subsidizing exotic invasive bird species any more than I like subsidizing invasive exotic plants. So if starlings are coming to my suet, I take it in because they cause so many problems for native cavity nesters by stealing woodpecker holes.
Okay.
And some bird parents, as lazy as some human parents, and will let their kids fill up on junk food. when I have robins or orioles or catbirds coming, adults, coming to a bit of grape jelly or some fruit that I have set out, that's fine. But if I have grape jelly out and those parents start bringing their babies, baby catbirds love grape jelly. Baby orioles do. But and it's not bad if the parents just bring them there once a day, but if the parents start spending time in the yard with the babies, letting the babies fill up on that, that's bad. And so I bring in the jelly. There's not a problem with hummingbirds coming to feeders in summer, even though they have so many plants. The problem is that they do have so many plants that they don't often come to the feeders, nowhere near as often each day as they do during migration. And that means that people who want to keep their hummingbird feeders out don't change the water often enough because it doesn't go down as fast. And that's bad. Sugar water starts to ferment as soon as you make it. And little by little, it's actually developing alcohol and other organic chemicals in there that are not good for hummingbirds that actually start causing liver damage in the hummingbirds. So if you're going to be feeding in the summer, it is critical that you keep the food fresh and you don't allow a few lazy birds to be taking their babies to inappropriate food too much. Grape jelly is not harmful for birds unless it's got artificial sweeteners in it, but it's probably not any better for birds than it is for children. So it needs to be part of a much bigger diet.
And you mentioned earlier about nutritious food. What constitutes nutritious food for birds? What should we be feeding? Is there a mix that is the best type of mix to get where? What should we be feeding birds, and is it seasonal as well?
That can be seasonal. The single most nutritious kind of bird seed to provide in winter especially, but also I use it year round, is black oil sunflower seed. And that's will attract the widest variety of birds and has the most calories for the amount of work it takes to get them. The striped sunflower seed is really good for birds, but it doesn't have as much oil in it, and oils and fats birds metabolize very well and are very useful for birds in wintertime. So the oil is slightly better. Now, there's one caveat. People who have problems with house sparrows coming to their feeders and taking all the sunflower seed, they have trouble cracking open the striped sunflower seed. It's got a much thicker, harder shell. And so if you have a problem with house sparrows, striped sunflower seed can help solve that.
That's good to know. So are are you saying just to purchase the straight black oil sunflower and just have that in your bird feeders, or is there anything else that we should be mixing in there or purchasing that way?
When I have juncos and mourning doves and migratory sparrows like white-throated sparrows that fly through Duluth in wonderful numbers most years, they really like white millet. That's very good for them. Cardinals love safflower. Not all cardinals. The ones in my yard never seem to have learned, gotten that memo. But in many places, they really are drawn to safflower. The problem with buying pre-mixed bird seed is that to make it cheapest for the companies that put it together, a lot of times it's got fillers like red millet that hardly any of our birds will even touch. So that seed spoils and it can end up getting bacteria and mold on the rest of the seed too as it collects the ground below feeders and in the feeders. One of the worst, most dangerous times for bird feeding is at winter's end when we start getting a lot of thaws and people have gone to winter without maybe raking up all the shells and spilled seed on the ground beneath the feeders, and it gets covered with snow and the snow melts and it's getting moldy. And early spring, April and a little bit into May, there are often cases of people finding, especially finches, the pine siskins are probably the most vulnerable, that end up getting salmonella or botulism from the spent seed.
That is something that's new to me, Laura. Are we supposed to be, what are we supposed to be doing in that time of year? Are we supposed to be raking that up and disposing of it, or what? Because I don't, and I see all my bird friends are on the ground pecking at things, and I've always thought that was okay.
It's okay for them to peck at it until it's collected for too long. So occasionally we go out and like shovel off the seed with the snow and let it sort of drain and throw it out. And then when we can rake, when we get enough into spring that we can do some raking it. And if you put it, it's not usually good to use sunflower seed shells in compost because it actually is sort of like black walnuts. There's a lot of plants that can't grow when it's there in the soil. So it's best to actually throw it out, not put it into compost that you're going to use for anything.
Laura, there are about 1,000 different questions that I have for you, for you as we've been talking here, and I've been writing furiously, and that. But I think that we're at a good point for people to know what to do. Except we haven't talked about two things. One is water, and the second one is shelter. What should we be doing for our bird friends for both water and shelter?
For water, bird baths or water features in your yard, whatever kind you might have, are great. It has to be pure water. You can't put in any of those things for that will keep down algae or kill mosquitoes. So you have to change bird bath water very frequently. I recommend at least twice a week because you don't want it to be standing long enough for mosquito larvae to go from egg to adult. And so keeping the water fresh is important. I love bird baths. I've had my best photographs in my life of a lot of warblers thanks to having bird baths. But they don't go to your standard bird bath on a stem with the bowl on top. They like a bird bath on or very close to the ground. So I have several shallow, just plastic, large bird baths that I put on the ground or on very low stands that I've gotten at bird feeding stores. And I go out with the high power on my hose and clean them out 2 or 3 or 4 times a week, depending on how many birds are using them.
And do you heat? Oh, sorry. Do you heat water during the winter?
No, I have never gotten into that. I have my whole career been really trying to conserve energy and not contribute to my carbon footprint. So I don't like using electricity to heat the bird bath. A lot of birds love it. And if you do it, make sure you keep the water clean again.
That is That is very conservation focused of you, and that's a beautiful thing. I feel a little guilty saying this now, but last winter we were going through COVID. My birds became my friends in my backyard, and I decided to get a heater, and it was amazing. And they were there often, and they really liked it, and it worked extremely well. But you are totally right about the conservation aspect of it.
But it's, I have 3 bird bath heaters, but I bought them. One year I got a rufous hummingbird from the West that showed up in my yard on November 16th, and it stayed until December 3rd. And I wanted to keep the hummingbird fluid so it didn't freeze on the birds.
Ah,
But it
yeah.
but what I ended up doing is just putting out, the feeder first thing in the morning while it was still dark, and the hummingbird would be there before light. And then I would swap it out with another one when it started freezing, and just bring that one indoors and just keep swapping them. And that worked out better than the heated bird baths that I still own but haven't used.
That is commitment to that little friend. And so one other thing is, let's talk about birdhouses and shelter. And I'm sure we could do at least 2 or 3 podcasts on this, but are there certain types of things you recommend for people to do to provide shelter, if anything at all?
If you're going to set out wren houses and chickadee houses, chickadees will nest in wren houses or vice versa. And there's good plans for many kinds of bird houses if you want to build them. Minnesota's own Carol Henderson wrote a fantastic book for the DNR called Woodworking for Wildlife. And it may be out of print now, but all the plans are online, and I'm sure your libraries will have it. And that talks not only about building the birdhouses, but where to put it to attract the birds you want, and about the birds' nesting requirements. So it's a very, very useful book. But you have to think of your whole neighborhood ecosystem when you're putting out birdhouses. I don't set house wren boxes in my yard ever, because I have so many blue jays who come. And one year, some house wrens nested next door, and the babies fledged into and the parents led the whole little crowd of like 6 or 8 babies into my raspberry bushes, and they were ambushed by a pair of blue jays that were feeding their fledglings, and it was heartbreaking. So so I don't want to attract the house wrens, because the blue jays do spend a lot of time in my yard. The kinds of plants you have will provide a lot of the shelter that you need. The very first pair of red-bellied woodpeckers that we have located the nest for in my county, St. Louis County, nested in my box elder on my driveway. And, letting your trees get a little old, unless they're actually, if you do not want to keep up a tree to help birds, if it's going to endanger your house or endanger people walking by, that's a no-brainer. So, but if the tree is, sturdy enough to be staying there, providing um, cavities for woodpeckers and the birds that use those woodpecker cavities, the chickadees and things like that, is a very good thing. Having good tangles of shrubs where catbirds and brown thrashers and robins can be nesting. Robins usually build their first nest of the year in a conifer. And then after the leaves come out, they'll build their second and third nests as often as not in a deciduous tree or in good thick shrubbery.
I thought they built all their nests under my deck, Laura.
Oh, they actually in Minnesota, in urban Minnesota, robins have a much higher probability of keeping their babies alive through the nesting period if they nest on our houses now. And Carol Henderson's Woodworking for Wildlife book has plans for robin platforms if you don't have a properly situated deck or whatever. The reason for that is that crows, their numbers have mushroomed in Minnesota in recent decades, and neighborhood crows need a lot of protein for their growing babies, and they get it in the form of baby robins.
That's fascinating. I had no idea that those two went together there. So, Laura, we are bumping up against the end of our time. I've taken up a lot of your time, and I really appreciate that. And we've got a couple of quick fire, like ending questions for you, and I'm going to add a special one for you as well. But as we get into this, are you ready for a couple quick questions about plants in Minnesota?
Sure.
All right. So your first question is, what is your favorite food grown in Minnesota?
My favorite food grown in Minnesota. Oh, I don't know. I think whether it's apples or cherries or corn.
Those are all perfect. That is great. I had my cherry tree this year the first time my cherry tree has produced enough fruit to allow us to eat some other than the robins eating all of our cherries. So it was super happy this year.
But pay attention to those robins. We've had 2 cherry trees for decades. One of them finally died this year, and black-capped chickadees nested in it. But I have, over the years in the cherry trees, seen a whole lot of warblers, hummingbirds eat the insects that are attracted to the fruits, and sometimes we'll take sips of nectar where a bird has bit into a cherry. So my husband, who loves cherry pies, has always allowed birds to take the cherries on the upper branches, so he won't bring a ladder out. He'll just get the lower stuff so the birds can have the high stuff. Orioles, just a nice variety of birds come to cherries.
Yeah, we had so much fun with the cherry tree this year because it's probably 5 or 6 years old now. So it was the first year it was big enough to have enough for everybody and not just let the birds eat the whole thing.
And that's so cool.
No, we made a lot of cherry jam though.
Oh,
so
cool.
That's how our cherries are living on. We made a cherry crisp while we had them, and then the rest of it went into jam. So it was good stuff. Next question is, what is essential reading for you?
Oh, let me see. I've read so many cool books. Jennifer Ackerman has written some wonderful books about bird intelligence that I've really enjoyed, that get really probe more into bird behavior. I wrote a book for the American Birding Association, their field guide to the birds of Minnesota, but identification is not my favorite thing about birds. It's the cool things about how each species has its own strategies for living. And so that's what I write about, and I really appreciate Jennifer Ackerman's research in that.
And we'll put a link to the show notes in there we'll link to the books and different things that you've talked about. So that's perfect. Next question is, what is your favorite place in Minnesota?
My favorite place? I don't know. It depends. With COVID, I have been forced to spend so much time in my backyard, which I have always loved, but I think it has made me love it more. I started recording birds in my backyard, and on my website, you can actually listen to my recordings that I made of the spring chorus. If you go to lauraerickson.com, there's one of the top things is miscellany. And if you click that, it's got a link to Laura's ambient sound recordings. And that some of the recordings are 2 and 3 hours of that has been very lightly edited. So it's just the birds singing when they, sometimes I would get up out of bed at 4 in the morning, set up my recorder, and go back to bed. But it was fun to listen to those hours when I was sleeping and the birds were singing away. And it just really made me appreciate my backyard more. And this year, my favorite species of all finally nested where I could watch them, my black-capped chickadees. So I love my backyard. But also, I love the Sax-Zim Bog, which is a wonderful forested boggy habitat north of Duluth, between like meadowlands and up to not quite up to Virginia.
I've never heard of that before. What is it?
Oh, it's a bog. And in wintertime, in February, they have a birding festival every year where you have a really good chance to see great gray owls and northern hawk owls. There's often snowy owls there, but you can see them right in Duluth usually. And once in a while, a boreal owl. But they also get these other wonderful winter birds. It's the best place in the state year after year after year to see evening grosbeaks. And it's like a magical habitat. They have a website and with a map that will show you all the places to go. It's totally undeveloped. They have a wonderful visitor center with a bathroom and stuff, but it's otherwise you just drive the roads and they have a few really nice boardwalk trails into the bog where you can find things. Many winters there's black-backed woodpeckers in there, and it's just a wonderful place. And birders from all over the world, and especially over the United States, come to Duluth every winter to see our amazing winter birds. They have their own website. There's a Friends of Sax-Zim Bog nonprofit organization that protects the habitat there, and their website is saxzim.org. That's SAXZIM.org. Sax and Zim were two little railroad towns that have pretty much disappeared, but that's what the bog's named for.
And I'll put that in the show notes as well so everybody can find that there. And I feel like you just answered our second to last question, which is one that I haven't asked anybody else yet, but you can confirm if that's true or not. But what is your favorite bird to watch?
The black-capped chickadee. I judge my favorite bird using the stranded on a desert island test. If there was only one bird that could be with me on a desert island, I would want it to be a bird that was friendly, that paid attention to me as much as me paying attention to it. So the blue jay is a close second.
Black-capped chickadees are so happy, and so that's great. And so the last question for you, Laura, and this is a question that comes from my daughter, Isla, who is 10. We were talking about starting the podcast, and she came up with this question for these ending quick-fire questions. And her question is, if you were a plant, what plant would you be?
Oh, let me see. I think I would want to be an oak tree. I could live for a really long time with so many birds coming and visiting me. I could be feeding birds with my acorns. I would especially love when blue jays come because they pick out acorns with 88% accuracy, which ones are viable, and they hide them, and they're going to go back and eat a lot of them. but they always hide more than they can find again, more than they need. And because they cover each one on the ground with a leaf, that helps that one to germinate. So blue jays would be my friends as an oak tree, and many, many birds nest in them. So that would be the plant I would want to be.
I love all of that. So, Laura Erickson, thank you so much for being with us today and talking about our birds and what we can do here in Minnesota. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you want to share with our listeners?
Not really, except you did ask me about ethics. And when we were just talking about the chickadee, it made me think of it. There have been a lot of studies, especially out of Wisconsin, first of all, showing that chickadees that come to feeders in the winter have a higher survival rate in severe winters than chickadees that live too far away from feeders. But they've also done a study that came out this year that showed that if they remove a couple feathers so a chickadee's not in prime shape and it needs to grow back those feathers, the chickadees will get more of their nutrition away from our feeders than they get at the feeders. They are really good at finding natural food, and maybe they get a better sense of, more variety or something by staying away from the feeders, but they don't need our feeders to survive, and they don't become dependent on them, but they do have a better survival rate when they can add feeders to their natural food mixture. So it's feeding birds, when done right, when you keep the seed clean and choose good varieties, will help birds without hurting them. But you have to keep it clean, keep it away from places where birds are going to hit your windows, and keep them away from cats.
Perfect. I love all of that. Laura Erickson, thank you so much for being with us here today. Can you remind everyone where they can find your website and where they can find you if they have questions or want to talk?
My website, which my amazing daughter put together, it's a complicated database but looks very simple and straightforward, is lauraerickson.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura, and have a wonderful rest of your night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See what I mean? That was just an absolute joy to listen to Laura Erickson talking about things that she loves with a passion. It was just wonderful, and like I said, so much fun to chat with Laura Erickson. So thank you so much for being with us. Now, we talked about things in the episode, you can find them in the show notes at minnesotagardening.com/8 is where you can find the show notes for this episode. There at our minnesotagardening.com, you'll also find all sorts of information about fall gardening, winter gardening, lots of different posts that we've got going on to help you learn more about gardening here in Minnesota. So I want to also request that you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a like and a review over there. Kimchi2004 said, I love the podcast is Minnesota centric with a variety of content. So thank you so much for that great review, and go give us a rating on Apple Podcasts especially, but would love to see that. In our next episode, we're going to talk about dormant seeding and how to incorporate more flowers into your turf area. So with that, we'll see you next Tuesday.